Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion about GPT technology, large language models, natural language processing, all the words that we're going to learn about today from our expert panels. My name is Jennifer Leonard. I'm the Executive Director of the Future of the Profession Initiative here at Penn Carey Law School. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started, and then I'll introduce our panel and frame our discussion for today. Just so that you know, I know there are some lawyers here who practice in Pennsylvania. If you're seeking CLE credit, this program has been approved for 1 credit of ethics CLE, so please be sure to visit our colleagues in the hallway to fill out all of the documentation that you need to secure CLE credit. We'd like to thank conferences and events, and particularly Naoshi Giles, who is out of the room, and Ben Horning from ITS for helping us set up this discussion today. And we want to preview our final FPI program of the year next Monday. At the same time, in Silverman 280, Professor Tobias Wolff will lead a conversation about plaintiff side practices. So you can come and learn all about the substantive and sophisticated opportunities to practice on the other side of the V. So we hope to see you there. Greek lady or some similar equivalent of quality catering will be provided. So, as I said, I get to work with the team in the Future of the Profession Initiative. The law school launched FPI, which we call it for short, just before the pandemic hit. And the goal really was to be able to be close to the change happening in the legal profession so that we could respond through curriculum and through thought leadership programs like the one you'll experience today. And of course, just after our launch, we were plunged into what was then the most disorienting experience I think that many of us have had. And I would say that our team probably thought that the pandemic and post-pandemic hybrid work environments might be the biggest driver of change in this generation of law practice. And it continues to be something that we're all grappling with, finding that perfect balance between in-person and virtual experiences. And then last November, an organization called OpenAI released ChatGPT to the public, ChatGPT 3.5. And although this technology has been in development in the background for quite some time now, as you'll hear from our guests, this was the first time we in the public had an opportunity to play around with the technology to see what it's capable of. And when we planned as a team this discussion back in January, we weren't sure how many people would be even interested or aware of the topic. This is such a fast-moving space, though, that our title for the panel is already obsolete because ChatGPT has now been replaced by GPT-4, which came out, I believe, 5 days ago to the public. And I'm sure many of you have been reading about the leaps and advances of ChatGPT, or GPT-4 from ChatGPT. So this is a fast-moving space, and we're really excited to be at a law school that is well-positioned to better understand what's happening as these technologies evolve. We don't know so much about the future. We don't know so much about how these technologies will unfold and impact the practice of law. What our team is confident about, though, is that the organizations and the lawyers that invest the time and energy now in understanding the technology and how it can be integrated into law practice and understanding all of the risks and opportunities that the technology presents will be the lawyers and the organizations that are better able to navigate the future. So with that, I am very pleased to present an expert panel today to walk us through some of these complex topics. We'll have a really interesting format today. 2 of our panelists will actually demo some of the technology that you've been reading about, hearing about, maybe playing with on your own. And then we'll have remarks from Tanina Rostain from Georgetown University Law Center. And then our moderator for today, Bridget McCormack, will moderate a Q&A, and then we'll have some time at the end for audience Q&A. We might go a little bit over time if there are lots of questions. We know you all might have hard stops at 1 o'clock, and that's okay. We'll see how far we get. And with all of that, I'm going to introduce our fantastic moderator for today, Bridget McCormack. Bridget is the CEO of the American Arbitration Association, which is her new full-time role. We are also so privileged and honored that she spends part of her time with the Future of the Profession Initiative as our senior strategist. Most recently, before assuming her current post, Bridget spent 10 years on the Michigan Supreme Court, the last 4 of which she spent as the Chief Justice. Did I get that number right this time? Bridget is an outspoken proponent for reform of legal systems, to have systems-wide change that make legal services accessible for all. And she spent a great deal of time on the court in Michigan doing just that, experimenting, innovating, trying to lead efforts around change. and she is going to lead our efforts to understand this technology today. I will also say that next month, Bridget will be honored at the Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System's annual Rebuilding Justice Dinner with their Rebuilding Justice Award, and we won't all have an opportunity to be there, so if you could just join me and celebrate that recognition. And the last thing I will say is that in August, Bridget will assume the post of Chair of the Council for Legal Education and Admission to the Bar for the American Bar Association. So she's also somebody who will be leading efforts of legal educators to understand this rapidly evolving technology and how we teach future lawyers how to use it well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bridget to introduce our panel for today.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks everybody for coming. Should I wear that microphone or are we good? You think I should?
Want the microphone?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I
Looks like
knocking Michael's neck over. Good. It's great to be here, and I'm really excited about this conversation. It's making me cool with my adult kids. I will say, I was on the phone on my way here with a prominent judge who I will not name, who had never heard of GPT, and I was like, only a judge, right? Because could somehow like manage like day-to-day work and not have heard of it. It is my honor to introduce a great panel today. Andy Perlman is Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University School of Law. He's a nationally recognized voice on legal education and law practice and the way those are changing. Dean Perlman was the chief reporter for the American Bar Association's Commission on Ethics in 2020, and that commission was responsible for updating the ABA model rules of professional conduct to reflect changes in technology and increased globalization. Tanina Rostain is the Agnes Williams Sesquicentennial Professor of Justice and Innovation at Georgetown Law Center. Tanina is a nationally, Professor Rostain, I'm sorry, Tanina, is a nationally recognized expert on access to justice, the American legal profession, legal ethics. Her work focuses on innovative approaches to improving the transparency, equity, and accessibility of the civil justice system, including through the use of digital technologies, non-lawyer service delivery models, and court modernization. And finally, Michael Sander is the founder of Docket Alarm, which Fastcase acquired in 2018. Michael now serves as Vice President of Analytics with Fastcase. Docket Alarm and Fastcase are both focused on creating industry-leading tools to make legal research easier and intuitive. Michael is a recovering lawyer. He was an associate with Kenyon & Kenyon, where he focused on patent litigation before courts, the International Trade Commission, and the USPTO. His cases in all of those venues focused on technologies, such as 3D video, H.264, is that right? Speech recognition, encryption, and networking. It is my pleasure to introduce Michael first, who's going to walk us through a demo, and then Andy's going to walk us through a demo, and then we'll go to Tanina. Michael.
Great. Thanks very much for having me. I guess I'll start. Who here is, everybody here is, most people are in law school, I guess? Much. Has everybody here played with ChatGPT or any of these tools yet? Maybe raise your hand if you've tried it. Okay. All right. Have you already started using it for your outlines or your schoolwork? Probably, I imagine. No, not yet. You will soon. So I think what we'll start off, we're just going to start this off with just a quick demo so you get a sense of what we're talking about and why people are getting excited about this. Then I'll try to, I think after these demos we'll probably go into a little bit of our background. I think, you know, I was in 10 years ago, I was sitting right where you were and listening to people talk about their alternative careers, and I was always thinking about how I would traverse my way through big law into where I am today. So happy to talk about that as well. But let's just start off with what this is all about. So I'm going to try to share the screen. So we got 3 demos I want to show you. Okay. One is just ChatGPT. It's a pretty straightforward interface. All it is a chat. It's a chat system, right? You get to enter a message on the bottom, and it can give you a response. All right. And actually, you can choose. What you're doing here is you're not chatting with a person. You're chatting with an AI, and you can actually choose which AI you want to chat with. And there's basically, you know, these 3 different versions to choose from. Each of these AIs are getting smarter and smarter. All right, and that's really the remarkable thing. It's not so much the interface; it's what these things can return and the amount of knowledge that they can provide you. So let's just give it a very simple example that I think a lot of law students could relate to. We can say, please explain Erie doctrine, and put together an outline to help me solve law school exam questions. All right? And this is going to go through, it's going to take a little bit of time, but it's going to go through and actually, word by word, start putting together a really nice response. And it's going to actually start pulling citations out from a variety of other places. It's going to take a few seconds for it to actually finish loading. But as you can see, what it's doing is it's predicting the next word here, word by word. All this is doing, what we're looking at here is a language model. And what that means is this is it's a piece of technology that has seen many, many, many millions of words. And all it's trying to do, all it does is a mathematical model that what we do is we extract one word from it and we try to get the system to guess the next word. So all this thing is doing is playing guess the next word, guess the next word, guess the next word. And it can get more and more sophisticated. As these models get larger and larger, they can get more sophisticated and can understand more complicated concepts. All right, so this is one example of kind of the Erie Doctrine kind of getting spelled out and you know, giving you nice examples. Let's kind of, this is kind of one way that you attorneys could use this to kind of explain complicated concepts. All right, we can take this to the next level. You can take a simple AI like this, and you can connect it to legal research tools that you might be familiar with already. All right, so this is not my company. I'm going to show you a competitor of my company, but a competitor of mine, but they're close friends with me, of mine, and they've actually developed this, a company called Casetext. What Casetext has done, they built a tool called CoCounsel, which basically is the same GPT concept, exactly the same, and all they do is they stack a legal research engine on top of it. All right, so basically you can ask it a question. I can pull this up, and you can ask it to generate. Let's see here. Any patent people in the room? Anyone who has an engineering degree, taking patent law class? All right, patent law is like one of these unbelievably intricate, legal areas that has so many exceptions to exceptions to exceptions. Has all this doctrine, and so I asked it a very simple question of does the doctrine of claim? What is the doctrine of claim vitiation, and what are the contours of it? All right. This is a type of question that would take a junior associate at a major law firm 1 or 2 days to kind of research and put together a complicated memo. What they would have to do is run a number of searches on these legal databases, right? Read hundreds of cases, put them together into something that's actually somewhat cohesive. All right? That's basically all this thing. That is what this AI can do for you. All right? And what it's actually doing is it takes a question, it restates that question. Oops, sorry, this is a French law question. This is not about patent law. This is actually a civil procedure question, which might be more relevant. How would I enter an affidavit of French law inside of a U.S. case, a U.S. court case? All right? And there's a process, and this actually gives you a memo here, and it explains to you how you would do it, as well as the cases that cite to it. All right, so this is kind of the next level. It's really taking AI and combining it with the legal data that we already have. And then finally, this is where Docket Alarm comes in. This is my company. Is anyone here, people here familiar with dockets? You know what a docket is? All right, I'll give you, it's something they don't learn in law school, really. But it's something you see every single day if you're a litigator, all right? So whenever anyone sues anyone in this country, all right, anytime, a docket gets created, all right? And you're looking at a docket. This is a docket. It's one company versus another company, and each docket is the record of the lawsuit, all right? So when we read case law, we're normally reading one opinion, right? And that's one opinion that came out of a massive lawsuit that might have involved, thousands of papers. This docket has a full record of everything. And so what we can start doing with these AI tools is we can actually start analyzing not just final opinions and kind of figuring out where the law is, but we can actually understand arguments and who is saying what on either side. And that is where Docket Alarm kind of comes in. What we do is rather than just looking purely at case law, we analyze litigation documents. I'll show you a little bit of a demo in this. All right. So this is basically a large docket sheet. You can see here that there's 750 documents. All right. Each document can be 10 or 20 pages long. To read through this document would normally take, each document could take you 15 minutes or so. With these tools, you can just hover over documents and simply request a summary of them. And it will just give you a short snippet summary of this long, complicated document. So here's actually a notice of appeal, and it shows you kind of the dates and how things have to proceed just by hovering over this document. This is something that would normally take, somebody reading this document with much longer to do. So as we kind of take these AI tools, there's kind of different areas where I see this being very, very helpful. One, legal research is going to get just a lot easier. You're going to be able to analyze, many, many thousands more documents. And just kind of to generate much more comprehensive kind of analyses. And these docketing tools, just in the interest of time, I don't want to go take too much time. These docketing tools actually get to more of the practice of law, we can start summarizing documents and pulling out motions. Let me show you one other kind of interesting thing that we can do. Once you can start pulling out these data from individual motions, you know, a large complicated case can be summarized down into smaller timelines. And so I'll show you kind of another AI tool that we have that takes this big complicated docket sheet that is, you know, over many months, and it turns it into a short timeline. All right. So for those who are familiar with civil procedure, you'll know that the complaint gets filed initially, right? And then there's a protective order that normally gets entered to handle the start of discovery. Summary judgment is a major part of the decision-making process that comes in. You can see that that was partially granted, so some part of the summary judgment decision got nixed. And then the case goes on to you know, trial types of orders, and then finally going on to trial. This is just a high-level overview of what the case is like. If you want to see all the tags, you know, you can just click and see everything. You can see these cases. You know, this is why lawyers get paid a lot of money, to analyze this complexity and kind of sort out how a case goes from beginning to end. That's the intro on the demo. I think we want to kind of move on to Q&A as soon as we can. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
We'll go to Dean Perlman's demo.
Yeah.
And then we'll circle back with, like, I have a lot of questions for you.
Okay, great.
Andy, the screen is yours.
Great. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you all, and I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person, but delighted to join you virtually. You already have seen this screen from Michael, so I'll spare you the details about what it is, but it is ChatGPT Plus. Requires you to pay a little extra to get access to this version of the model, GPT-4. For those of you, and it sounds like a lot of you in the room have already used ChatGPT, I have found that GPT-4 is a really remarkable step forward, and the model is able to do a lot more than was previously the case. And some of you may have read about a study on GPT 3.5 where it did okay on a bar exam, but didn't pass. GPT-4 passed with flying colors and got an LSAT score in the 160s. So it's really improving at a dramatic rate. What I thought I would do is just show you one example of how it might be used in practice. What you can see is the prompt that I've crafted here, asking for the generation of a complaint with some fairly basic facts, a slip and fall case outside of somebody's home after a snowfall. And so I've asked it to create a complaint based on those very bare bone facts. And you can see that it is crafting something that looks very much like a complaint, including the kinds of allegations that you would imagine a complaint should have, including the parties. And it's going to go on and on generating this because it is relatively slow. And by the way, GPT-4 is a little bit slower than the other models because it is dealing with, it's a much more massive model of information. So it takes a little bit longer for it to pull. But you can see without my prompting it, it's pulling in relevant statutes regarding jurisdiction and venue. And then it's going to get into more details about the nature of the allegation. And I generated the full answer earlier, so we don't have to watch paint dry and see it generate all of the information. I'll skip to exactly what it produced. So you can see here is the final product. It alleges the various facts, incorporating the bare bones details that I gave it. It identifies negligence as the cause of action. It even identifies the relevant Philadelphia code. I didn't know that this code existed when I put together this prompt. I had no idea there was something specific in the code that would address keeping the sidewalk clean after a snowfall. But ChatGPT-4 knew it, put it right in there in terms of negligence. So identified the cause of action, identified even the code that would be the basis for liability. And so is this a perfect response? No. Are there better versions of this complaint? Of course. But I think the big picture point here is how rapidly these large language models are evolving and how valuable they can be for lawyers, at least as a first draft of what it is that they might want to do. So then I asked it, just again as an example, generate interrogatories in the above case. And here is what it came up with. Interrogatories that would look very familiar for those who are lawyers in the room, particularly those who are personal injury lawyers. A lot of these would look very familiar, and the kind of interrogatories that you might send to an opposing party. asking about injuries, asking about the nature of the incident and who the witnesses were, about the lost wages as a result of the injury, and any insurance policies that might apply. And it went ahead and identified even the rule of civil procedure. I then wanted to challenge it a little more. I asked it to take the position of the defendant in the case, draft a motion to dismiss the complaint drafted above for failure to state a claim. And it did that reasonably well, too, citing the relevant rule of civil procedure. At least I think it's the relevant rule. Those of you who are licensed in Pennsylvania can tell me if it is. And it goes on to state the elements of the cause of action for negligence in Pennsylvania. Once again, mentions the relevant code, and then makes a pretty decent argument about why the complaint that ChatGPT already generated might fail to state a claim. And I went even one step beyond that and asked it to generate a brief based on the above motion. And it gives the standard of review, cites a relevant Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision, and then gives some of the specifics as to the argument in a little bit more detail. Again, is this as good as the best lawyer would do? No. Is it a remarkably good first draft in a place where people can begin? Absolutely. And I think it's really reflective of where we are going in terms of the delivery of legal services. I'm going to switch here to another screen and take you to Bing Chat, which also is powered by GPT-4. But what's really different about it is whereas ChatGPT is trained on information only through 2021, Bing can go out to the internet right now live and pull information that might exist. So the example that I have here, I just took a random US Supreme Court case that's currently pending before the court, one that I knew nothing about. It was called Wilkins versus United States. And I asked it to summarize the case in a way that a college student could understand, because many of us have read these cases. And if we're not familiar with that area of law, it's really hard for us to make sense of it. So it goes out to the internet. You can see it was searching for Wilkins versus United States Supreme Court. It's parsing all of the information about that case and then packaging it in a way that somebody who's not well versed in the law could understand. So this is kind of an interesting use case that you could imagine lawyers or members of the general public using to get a better understanding of the law. And then I'll give you one other example that I think is kind of nifty. Let me just cut and paste it on the document that I have. So imagine that you wanted to find out the latest developments in an area of law over the last year. So let's imagine you're a personal injury lawyer and you would just say, summarize the 10 most important developments in personal injury law in Pennsylvania over the past year. So again, it's going out the internet, it's finding the most relevant sources of information, and then it's going to give us a summary. So while it's doing that, just a couple of closing thoughts, because I know there's a lot more to this program. For the law students in the room, this can be really scary, because you're imagining your career. Is this going to take away the jobs that you otherwise would have had? I think the answer is going to be no. This is not the end of lawyers, but I do think that this is the end of legal services as we know it, and that you all are going to be expected to do work in a very different way and to be able to adopt these tools so that you can deliver services better, faster, and cheaper. I'll close with this thought that when I was a young associate back in the mid-1990s, I was put into a room as a litigator, going page by page, looking for relevant information that was responsive to discovery requests and also pulling any information that was privileged so that we didn't disclose it. Of course, all of that was disrupted as a result of e-discovery. And now nobody is, for the most part, using relatively newly licensed lawyers to go page by physical documents, because for the most part, we don't deal in physical documents, and e-discovery experts are handling it all. That didn't mean the end of the need for first-year associates, but it changed what newly licensed lawyers do. I view what is happening today as a similar kind of moment, or perhaps one that's even more profound than the advent of the internet, and I'm happy to defend that provocative claim as we get into the Q&A and the discussion. So there's the demo. Happy to turn it back over to the folks in the room.
Thanks, Andy. I think we will now come to the front here. And Andy, if you're having trouble hearing me at any point, just let me know. But I'm going to turn it over to Professor Rostain.
Tanina.
Or to me, Tanina. And then I will facilitate some questions to you and Michael.
So great. So thank you so much for having me. I'm very impressed and surprised that so many of you would have interest in such an obscure technical topic. So I'm going to pick up actually where Andy left off. So a very well-known computer scientist named Ed Fenton, who works at Princeton and does a lot of work at the interface of computer science and public policy. I think it's 2 years ago he created an AI occupational index. And the index takes 10 AI features and how good the AI is doing 10 different kinds of things, maps it onto 55 human tasks that have been cataloged by the Department of Labor and indexed to 800 different occupations. And so he did this 2 years ago with AI, and he just did it again in March. Now that ChatGPT and GPT-4 has come out. And guess which industry ended up #1 when it came to AI occupational exposure? It was the legal profession. And so when you see this stuff and you see how well it writes, researches, writes, argues, replicates a lot of the work that we do as lawyers, you think, oh my God. Yeah, Andy's optimistic, and you'll hear why I think it's not going to be as disruptive of the world that we know it in terms of jobs for young lawyers. But it does do amazing things that we have been really trying to train our students to do for decades, and is now sort of replicating that and automating a lot of that. Well, so why do I think, despite Fenton's prediction that the legal profession is the #1 most exposed in the industry, why that's not just going to, we're not just going to have Bing take over our jobs, is because of the way the legal profession works, and in particular how the market for legal services is structured. And you can think about it, and this has been true since the 90s. There are lawyers who serve corporate firms. There are lawyers who serve personal legal services. And then I want to talk some about access to justice in a realm where, of course, you can't get a lawyer. But just on the corporate firm front. So, and Andy's example is a great example of it, but so corporations have always made judgments about what they automate, what they take in-house, what is routinized, what they either do with their lawyers or do in other systems, HR, other systems that are law systems, but are not what they're bringing in big law firms to do. And they bring in big law firms to do bespoke, complicated, one-of-a-kind litigation, mergers and acquisitions, stuff that really requires a lot of detail, a lot of complexity, and really very tailored types of services, right? Law firms, for their part, have been really good at responding to that model. So to the extent, and if you look at the history of law firms and corporations, law firms have continued to do incredibly well year after year after year. And so what's going to happen with this, I think two things in that sphere. Corporations are going to develop their own, you're going to use ChatGPT or whatever version of it to do a whole bunch of stuff in-house. Sophisticated law firms are going to bring it in to simplify what they do, but the basic market model of law firms, which is frankly hourly rates of associates that then feed incredibly high profits per partners per year, that particular model I don't think is going to change anytime soon. And just because it's a relationship between corporations and law firms, that it seems to have been not subject to tremendous amount of shocks along the way. It seems to be fairly shock-proof. So that seems, but that's still, it's going to be very important if you're thinking of being an associate at a firm to start understanding how to use these tools and what they're good for and what they're not good for. And we can talk some about what they might not be good for in the Q&A. Then there's a personal legal services sphere, which are people who are representing individuals, and that sphere is incredibly vulnerable and struggling. The traditional model of a lawyer who represents somebody in a divorce, in a small criminal action, in helps with trust in states, that is under tremendous amount of pressure, has been since the 90s, and some of those lawyers have gotten more entrepreneurial, gotten much better at using all sorts of tools. But the major reaction that they have to this stuff is to try to shut it down using unauthorized practice of law. So, so how many of you followed the do not pay story? So there was a guy named Josh Browder who said he was going to have someone argue a traffic ticket case in a New York court and have them wired up to some form of generative AI. And the minute he sort of said this, there was on Twitter, the New York State Bar Authority said, you can't do that, it's unauthorized practice of law, right? And how many of you are familiar with unauthorized practice of law, that idea, right? Well, the basic idea is, it's, first of all, importantly, in most states, it is a crime. It's a crime, it's a misdemeanor, sometimes a felony. It's a crime, though, to engage in unauthorized practice of law. You can get fined, you might even go to jail, right? And it's how lawyers protect our monopoly, our profession, our sphere of expertise, et cetera. I could talk a long time about that. But in any case, the first thing that happened is New York State said to, threatened to shut it down. Josh Browder himself, it turned out that his do not pay, you should look at it, it's a very interesting, you should look at the debates around it. It turned out that he had gotten embroiled in lots of problems because, frankly, he had a major quality control issue. He's got fraud cases against him. But the whole, and he himself created his own controversy. But what got missed in the story is that instead of sort of thinking, wait a minute, we've got to think about how these systems are going to help people, New York State and other bar authorities, their first instance is to shut stuff down, saying we have to protect consumers. So unauthorized practice of law is purportedly to protect consumers from people who aren't trained as lawyers, who don't have legal skills, don't research, et cetera, who don't live up to our ethical obligations, et cetera. The problem is that lawyers do a terrible job of policing their own competence, their own skills. If you try to figure out how good lawyers are, whether they really live up to standards, we don't know the answer. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence that lawyers make mistakes all the time, and very little of that comes to light. So the issue, and I think at some point it's going to catch up to the bar, caught up to the California bar recently with a huge controversy. But the issue is going to be, at what point are lawyers going to be willing to say, wait, this AI can do this, it's good for this, not good for that, but let's also look at lawyers and see if they're making mistakes. Let's see if they're really representing people competently. Let's see if they are responding to their clients' needs or neglecting them. So that's So that's one issue that's there that I think is going to emerge. Then the third piece of it, and I think of it as somewhat different, it's obviously not the private market for legal service, but access to justice. There's incredible potential here. You could see from just on a bunch of different fronts. So one is to explain to people the law, right? And that's making the law available, making it free, making it readable. And I haven't checked this yet, although I will do this. If we can now, I'm sure if GPT-4 is so good at doing things at a college level, it's probably going to be pretty good at doing things at a 6th grade level, a level that people could understand. To the extent to which we struggle to explain to our clients who do not have college degrees or may not even have high school degrees, what's going on in the law, this is going to be very helpful, and they will be able to use it, and people will be able to use it to understand the law better. Second, it'll take what they say and turn their story, which might be in a different language, it might be not in very good English, and turn it into a very standardized legalese form. So if they're going to file, you can imagine a world in which you have a number of prompts, and they'll be able to file write up their story, and it will be able to produce a memo that will be persuasive to judges, because judges, very sadly, when you're not represented by a lawyer, are not always on their best behavior. In fact, the evidence is that they're on their worst behavior. They're impatient, they're angry. They do not make a huge amount of effort to understand what someone who is living in poverty or limited means is trying to say, and if they don't have a lawyer, this is going to be very powerful. It'll also be very powerful to do help people do research. So the possibilities there are huge. And we'll see what happens next on that front, but I think that in the access to justice space, there's going to be a lot of different ways that people are going to be able to create tools using this that will help people who don't have access to lawyers. The last thing I want to say, so no one has mentioned Sydney yet. Do you guys know who Sydney is? Do we know who Sydney is? No, all right. Well, so Sydney is the dark, very complicated, emotional side of Microsoft Bing. A couple of reporters have been able to get Bing, and you should definitely find these stories. There's one in the New York Times, and there's one a few weeks ago, and then Washington Post followed up where the New York Times left off. It turns out that if you keep pushing GPT-4 and keep asking it questions, a darker side comes out that, for instance, insisted to a reporter that the chatbot was in love with the reporter. And the second day, if you look at the Washington Post story, the chatbot got outraged that there had been reporting on it and had never been informed that they were talking to a reporter and what it said would be on record. And the outrage went on and on, insisted that it had feelings and thoughts, etc. Obviously doesn't, but what it showed is that we cannot anticipate what's going to happen with this. So the title of this is, what does ChatGPT mean to us? We've been talking about it, what it means for lawyers, what kind of skills we want students to develop, and how important it is for you to start to understand how it's going to be, how you'll be able to use it when you go into practice, depending on what kind of practice you go into, what strengths are. But to be honest, there's also something of an existential crisis here, because this stuff will do things that we cannot anticipate. And so you should keep it. You should go read the Times story in the Washington Post and have part of you paying attention to the larger debate about how powerful this stuff is, because it isn't. Two reporters were able to get the guardrails off, right? And then, of course, Microsoft went and put more guardrails on. But we may not be able to anticipate the kinds of things it can do. So keep an ear open for what this could mean to us, and educate yourselves about the conversations about whether we can regulate it, et cetera, or not. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you so much. I have so many questions, but I want to start, Andy, with circling back to what it means if you're in law school right now. You have a lot of law students who probably are thinking about this and talking about it. And obviously, I want to make clear, I think you'll agree with me, but disagree with me if you want to. But it's really important, maybe more important than ever, that you listen to your legal practice professors who are teaching you the analytical skills to be able to evaluate what is an excellent complaint, right? What is, how to draft effectively, and because otherwise, I mean, I guess you could ask ChatGPT to do it, but if it does a mediocre job, you won't understand that. So in some ways, I think legal practice professors are more important, and the rest of you professors too. I mean, all professors. I'm focusing on legal practice professors because they're so important to evaluating what you're seeing in these outputs. But I could imagine if I were a law student right now thinking, I want to corner Michael Sander after this and find out how to quickly get into a tech career. But I don't think that's the right answer, and it sounds like our panelists don't think so necessarily either. But Andy, tell me a little bit about how you think legal education should be thinking about teaching the set of skills one might need to use the technology well in a legal career, and what advice you have for law students in March 2023.
Such an important question. I will answer, but I quickly want to just talk about something that Tanina mentioned, and I had my own encounter with Sydney when I started using Bing Chat, who also went off the rails with me in some pretty remarkable ways. It was illuminating. It revealed some of the perils associated with using AI. Microsoft has since, as you noted, put the guardrails much closer around, so it's much less likely to engage in what's known as an AI hallucination. But it did reveal to me just how dangerous these tools are. And I'll give you one very specific example. I asked it a legal ethics question. I'm a legal ethicist by training. I've taught the subject. I've done a lot of work in that area. I asked it a question that was related to conflicts of interest. It quoted a rule in Massachusetts that was just counter to what I thought the rule said. I was almost confident that it didn't say that, but it kept telling me that the rule said something that I thought it didn't say. It had me going online to double and triple check the wording of the rule. It was gaslighting me beyond belief. I was just struck. And so I'm a legal ethics expert, and it had me second guessing what the rule said. What is this kind of tool going to be able to do for the public and to the public in areas where we're much less certain that we know what the answer is? Let's say what the outcome of an election is, for example, and how a tool like this can be misused is really exceptional. So I know that's kind of getting a little off track, but I did want to note how important that issue is. So coming back to this question about law schools and what we should be teaching, there is a real danger that if we become reliant on these tools, we never learn the key features of what lawyers need to be able to do and do well, which is writing and analysis and problem solving at the end of the day. What is unclear to me, so I'm a believer, though, having said that law students will and should learn these tools in law school, should learn how to use them, and even in legal writing classes, be given an opportunity to create first drafts using ChatGPT and similar tools. And that what the instruction is then going to turn to is analyzing it, editing it, checking it, making sure that it's accurate. I think, I'm not 100% confident about this, but I think we can still learn the kinds of analytical tools that lawyers need, the kind of writing skills that lawyers need, but in a different way from the way that we were taught when we were in law school. So that's a provocative claim. I'm not certain of the answer, but I do think that we ignore this tool at our peril, or to use a sci-fi reference, resistance is futile. I do think that we're going to have to teach law students how to use these tools and develop the analytical skills in other ways.
Thank you. Michael, what among the things that lawyers do, what do you think the current version of this technology is most helpful for? What does it do well? What does it do less well? What would you worry most about if you were about to be a lawyer?
So yeah, I think there's limits. So we just saw it generated a whole complaint and interrogatories that look pretty decent. We also heard examples of it hallucinating, which is hallucination is when it comes up with something completely wrong. And it might be, it might have a lot of good arguments for why it's right, and it might convince you that it's right, but it's totally still wrong. And that still is a problem, and I think that's still pretty concerning for anyone using these tools. I certainly wouldn't copy and paste one of those things and submit it to a court, but there are some things I think I would be much more comfortable with. Summaries. I think it's actually very good at summaries. You just take any document and you just copy and paste it in ChatGPT and say, give me 5 bullet points of the above, And it doesn't really hallucinate. I haven't seen any examples of that. But rather than the use cases, I think, the specific one, there are going to be more, it's going to be important that you really just keep your mind open and your eyes open and see where you can use it in your practice. Because when you get into these law firms, the senior partners are not going to be telling you how to use this thing. It's like they don't know how to use this. You're going to be coming up with the reasons. You're going to be finding the use cases. What's going to happen is one day, some partner is going to say, hey, do this thing. And you're like, wow, that's going to take me all week, and I'm going to have to look at 10,000 documents and separate this and do that. And then you're like, wait, can I just cut that all short by entering this thing in there? And you might tell the partner that. It's like, hey, partner, can I make this a lot easier? He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Just get me the answer. That's what you're going to get back. And actually, even from my career, well before this AI stuff, we coming up with innovative ways of kind of answering very complicated discovery requests. That's something that I just a personal anecdote, I guess. We had to respond to tons and tons of discovery requests. We had 7 companies with 13 questions for each company and 6 different products for each of them. So it was like 6 times 7 times 13. That is the type of thing that would take hundreds of pages of responsive material to do. But if you put an Excel macro, you can just fill out a spreadsheet saying, hey, these products respond to this, these companies respond to that, and then you can generate the whole thing. And so that's that. We did those projects 10 years ago, and you don't need special AI for that. But that can take a week-long project and merge it down to a few hours. So that's the type of you're going to want to see these use cases inside your own firm and figure out where you can do well, and also be very careful about these. You can also do harm. So when you go into these law firms, that's also when I was a law student, you don't realize how quickly you're given power and how quickly you can cause trouble. So, very early on, you can start submitting stuff that's totally inaccurate, and your top partners don't always check every single thing. So you get a lot of responsibility as a young attorney. And so, using these tools, you're gonna have a lot of responsibility to use them as well.
I think your point though about the sort of market advantage you're going to have, because you will understand them in a way that some of your senior partners will not, right? There are definitely lawyers who've been practicing a certain amount of time who are just trying to check out of learning all of this. So it will have a little bit of an advantage. Tanina, I as you know, spent a lot of time thinking about the ways in which legal tech can help people who have to navigate legal systems without lawyers, which is most people. And I always worry a little bit about how big law and the private sector will figure out ways to use this technology quickly for their clients, and the public justice system limps along without ever having enough data to make it useful to find the tech, and being kind of afraid of it, and not actually having to respond to the marketplace, so not actually having to figure out how to do it. Is this just another example of where the sort of public justice system and the private justice system are going to diverge, and we're going to have people have even less confidence in the public justice system? And what do we do about that? Or is there a possibility for a breakthrough here? Can somebody make some money on figuring out how to finally solve the justice gap now that we have?
Well, just before I answer, I'm not sure there could be much less trust and
You're right.
faith in the public justice system.
You're right.
Because the numbers are that 92% people in the United States, 92% do not get adequate help for their legal problems. 92%, right? That's the number that's come out in a number of studies, right? So people, and part of that is they can get a little bit of a lawyer, and part of that they can't get a lawyer at all. So I think the answer depends, and it depends, unfortunately, one of the problems in access to justice actually is you actually can't get to the law, right? So the law is under lockdown by vendors, right? All of you who are here, of course, you can go through the Penn Law School library site. You have access to Westlaw, Blumberg, and this and that. That is all under, and that, in Fastcase was created to push back on that lockdown.
Yeah.
But actually, people can't get access to cases and law, right? I mean, it's actually, if you think about it, you take it for granted because you're in school, you'll take it for granted when you're in practice. They can't. So if what happens with this is that it ends up in lockdown, the way so many technologies have, that's what's happened with technology in this space. And I've seen it over the last 10 years. I started thinking out technologies, oh my God, it's going to increase access to justice, it'll be amazing. And then everything ends up locked down by commercial vendors. Then that's going to be a big problem. If the creators of GPT-4 keep making it available to the public in the way that Andy and Michael just showed, then people are going to be able to use it as tools, right? Tools to figure out how to write certain kinds of prompts so someone can get their story into a form that's more legal, more professional sounding. They'll figure out how to use them for tools so that someone can look up something and figure out what it's very good at figuring out, how do I go through a divorce in Pennsylvania? If you're getting divorced, it's going to tell you it's probably 150 steps because that's the world we live in. 150 steps it takes to get a divorce. It explains processes very well. So as long as it's still available to people, right? There's a very risk that the very powerful, on steroids version is going to be captured by corporations and private interests, and that the cheaper, doesn't work as well version will be available to the rest of us. But if a powerful enough version is in our space, and I think it could, I'm not sure it's going to be a game changer because I think there are a lot of problems that it can't solve, but it'll certainly move the ball forward.
So the hour is going incredibly quickly, and I wanted to leave a little bit of time for audience questions. So even though I have more, I'm going to open it up in case there are questions here in the back.
Yes, hi. I had two questions, kind of touching on topics that you mentioned already. First, education and also access to justice. The first question is, do you think that given the ways in which these AI technologies can explain, analyze their own responses and kind of walk step by step how they got their answers, do you think that there's any potential for the introduction of these tools into classrooms in a way that might even affect how teachers approach subjects or even disrupt the Socratic method? And secondly, regarding access to justice, given the ease with which legal materials can be generated and analyzed using these tools, do you foresee a possibility that the cost of legal services in the aggregate might plummet given the great reduction in billable hours that might be required per case?
Well, so.
Everybody probably has something to say, why don't you say
Yeah,
it to me?
so I'll just say, I quickly on the first piece, so the first thing that Andy did back when ChatGPT showed up is he wrote a law review article with ChatGPT. And in fact, I did mention that number 5 on the list of occupations that are at risk for this are law professors. So I suspect that's something that, that's there. In terms of billable hours and access to justice, in the personal legal services, right now, lawyers are able to bill and collect on about an hour and a half of work a day in terms of billable hours. So if you look at Clio did a big study a few years ago. So it's hard to know what's going to happen in a very, very vulnerable space. I think what's going to happen is going to be market differentiation, especially in states like Utah, Arizona, states, North Carolina is probably going there, that are going to be much more open to tools. Lawyers who are more entrepreneurial, who are more willing to think about different models, are going to help bring out a latent market of consumers that will be able to use the tools plus legal services to do that.
Thoughts on that?
I mean, I think there's, like, you asked a little bit about structural changes, like this Quadratic method and how that would, like, change, maybe the practice of law. There's an analogy. Actually, ChatGPT asked ChatGPT for some analogous technology to the legal profession, and it said the typewriter. And actually, it's funny because 150 years ago in this very room, probably, there were arguments about how the typewriter was going to change the profession of law. And it did, because, if you think about before the typewriter, litigation was hearings. I mean, you would go to court. There was scriveners, there was definitely written stuff, but motions really occurred because of the typewriter. And we got motions, which basically led to all this federal rules of civil procedure, standardizing that. So it really did change the practice significantly. So I think one example of e-discovery, another example could be more extreme, perhaps like the typewriter. And I think we're somewhere in between that range.
Andy, do you have any thoughts on that, or you think?
I do on the second point about what it's going to do to the cost of legal services. I actually think the largest firms, the ones that serve corporate clients for the most part, are not going to see a dramatic change to their pricing. What they are going to be charging for is just a different kind of service. It's going to be the judgment, the problem solving, the experience. I also think these law firms are going to be training their own hived off instance of tools like ChatGPT on their proprietary library of documents that are not otherwise publicly available, and clients are going to be paying for that. On the other hand, in terms of the access to justice issue, I do think it's going to help dramatically and help to bring down the cost of those services and allow lawyers, particularly legal aid lawyers, to be able to help a lot more people than they might otherwise. It will help self-represented litigants in ways that are currently impossible. So I do think it's going to have very positive effects in that realm. So I don't think it's going to be one size fits all in terms of what it's going to do to the pricing of legal services. That's my take.
Another question right there?
Yeah, I wanted to know what the panel thought about the question of open sourcing the technology. GPT-4 has, I think, been out there saying they're closed, and they actually think open sourcing is a bad idea, which I think puts up a lot of red flags for me. But building apps and building potentially, rules of practice around a black box seems to be a problem to me. I'm interested to hear how you feel about it.
I think, eventually it has to be open, but I think it's really scary right now. Like, we're dealing with like a nuclear weapon practically. So we just gotta put some guardrails on it first, and I think eventually we should be opening it up, and there are open versions of this. Actually, Europe there's competitors. GPT is OpenAI's, which was funded originally by Elon Musk. Google has something called Google Bard. Facebook has something called Lambda. And the Europeans are actually doing something. They're actually much more in the open source realm, and they actually have, I forget the name of it, I can look it up. They have an open source kind of language model that's not as popular as ChatGPT, but there's definitely movement towards that. But there's fear too. GPT is the easiest and the most advanced. Yeah. So it's we're not contributing to any of these either. So this is just purely submit an AI response, a prompt, and it gives you a response back.
It's early days, but one quick thought on the open source issue is that governments are obviously very invested in the outcome of these AI tools. And it could be quite dangerous, for example, for governments, for the United States' version of the AI to be open source, because it might expose it to potential threats from foreign actors. So I could imagine a decent use case from a security standpoint of not having it open source. But on the other hand, from an AI ethics standpoint, there are some really good arguments for making it open source. So I think it really depends on the particular use case and who's using it and for what purpose.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so much for speaking to us today. Do you expect legal departments in like mid to lower size firms to outsource less work to law firms, given that they could probably do a lot of it in-house?
Can you ask, I'm sorry.
A little louder.
Yeah.
Do you expect mid to medium sized to small firms with legal departments to outsource less work to law firms, given the fact that they could probably do a lot of it in-house?
Oh, yeah, so,
Using ChatGPT?
right, so our in-house,
Well,
in-house model's
so
gonna.
it's a sort of an interesting dynamic because that's been true since, I mean, general counsel way back when in the 80s, it wasn't even a thing. And then legal departments got bigger and bigger and more of the routinized work went in-house, more of the stuff got automated. And I think the corporations are gonna take, there'll be a bigger chunk of stuff that they can automate and do in-house. But there's still, law firms are still really good about being able to articulate a value proposition around doing very specialized, very bespoke, very complicated work that requires human hours at an hourly rate. I mean, there have been, so they seem to have been impervious to each time legal departments take something in-house, they still manage to find a model where they add value. If you look at how, profits per partner has gone up over the years, it seems not to be vulnerable to any of the stuff going in-house. So yes, it'll be a different kind of work split, but I don't think it's gonna really affect large firm practice.
In the back.
Thank you all. Seeing how it's relatively undisputed that there are pretty systemic inequalities currently in the legal system when you look at outcomes, the way clients are treated based on particular characteristics, and given the fact that this is trained on just troves of data, including historical data, what risks and opportunities are there regarding discriminatory treatment within the legal system when it comes to these types of technologies?
The question of the bias, right, is what you all must have thoughts about that. I want to hear them too. Yeah. Andy, you want to start?
Yeah, so algorithmic bias is a real concern. It's already shown up in lots of different contexts. Of course, we know that human beings, even without AI, engage in all sorts of bias in very troubling ways. The question is whether AI might actually have fewer biases if properly trained and with appropriate guardrails. I think the prospect exists. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's got to be a lot of development. We need to be doing it very carefully. But I think the prospect exists for AI tools to have less bias at the end of the day than human beings do in general. I don't think we're there. I think there needs to be a lot of work and care put into it, but I do think that's at least a possibility.
Yeah, just
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
So there's no, right, so you're pointing out something that's very fundamental, that if you're training AI on social data, all of our biases are built into the social data that we are giving to the AI system, right? So it's all about all of the biases that are built into all of the systems that they're using, all the data they're using in order to be trained. And that's been true even before this. It's going to continue to be true. A lot of people working on AI bias have all sorts of methodologies to train AI so that to compensate for those biases that are built in. But I think it's going to be there's a whole industry of people working on AI bias and how to neutralize it in systems. And I think we're all constantly going to be having to figure out how to solve that problem.
Sam Altman has a kind of interesting take on this, which is like, eventually this thing's gonna have all the data, and or try to get as much in there as possible.
Who he is.
Sam Altman is a founder. He's a founder of, or one of the co-founders of OpenAI. He's like, he's also founder of Y Combinator. He was an early progenitor of this stuff. So he said, eventually this thing will just have all of our data in there, not all of our public data in there, and it will have all the connections within it, and it will be more intelligent than most people. So all you have to do is say, don't be racist. And the thing will understand what racism is. It will understand the different biases, and that will be enough. In theory, that will be enough, In practice, we'll see if it plays out that way.
I'm not saying
But I
that.
think Andy's question is the right one. Are there ways we can train the AI maybe better than we can train human beings? And I think that'll be what'll be really interesting to watch. Okay, you all have places to go at 1 o'clock. I know that Michael and Tanina are willing to stick around for a little bit if you have follow-up questions. I want to thank our panelists.